despite the state repression, we have a very vibrant intellectual community in Iran. For him and many others, you could not and should not separate Western democracies from their colonial impulse. Colonial impulse is a part and parcel of Western democracies.
Dr. Ghamari-Tabrizi, in the last segment, I cut you off because I said you were getting into a very fascinating part of a sexy part of our conversation about the study of history and our university system. So I'll just follow on that. In America, we're going through a period in which we're correcting and canceling history. It's been happening for the last decade. So are there lessons from the Middle East for us here? Remember in the last segment, I said, you're not free to study history the way we are here.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we can learn from the Middle East and from Iranian experience in particular, because Iranian experience is important and a bit different from the rest of the Middle East because of the revolution that happened in Iran in 1979, that what we need in the US is a space for public engagement about history. History is not only taught at the universities. If you, for example, today you go to Iran, you mentioned that you go to a bookstore and it's incredible what kind of books are available there. I mean, it's mind-boggling that the books that are translated into Persian and you can buy them. And then in the afternoon.
Oh, so I was wrong. They do have access to a wide.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. They have incredible. And this is one of those paradoxes, that you see that kind of very vibrant. This is the point I wanted to draw on, that the lesson we can learn that it has generated, despite the state repression, we have a very vibrant intellectual community in Iran. And that kind of, universities are controlled by the state and their repressive policies are implemented there. People are dismissed from their jobs, tenured faculty are sacked, and so on and so forth. But then outside of that, there is a whole world of public intellectual engagement.
That's amazing.
We do not have that in the US.
We don't.
We need that in the US. And this is sort of in the 1960s, for example, in France, there was such a condition that public intellectuals were so important. And we have some public intellectuals in the US, but only on the margins. We need a space in which that these issues about history, and I really appreciate what you do. And one of the reasons I'm eager to talk to you is exactly that, because this is a step towards generating that kind of space for public conversation about deeper meaning of everyday events,
Yeah.
And so this is really something that I tell you this little anecdote and we can move on. One of my old friends who moved back to Iran and got a job as a lecturer at the university, and then I was talking to him. I said, can you sustain your livelihood from your salary from the university? He said, no, salary from the university is nothing. I teach evening classes to like an adult school, and I said, like what? He said, well, I offer 3 weeks of philosophy of Hegel and 3 weeks on intensive Nietzsche. And I said, look, what? Who comes to these classes? He said that, I have a long waiting list for these classes.
Dr.
And they're like,
Ghamari-Tabrizi, you need several bottles of wine to sit there and teach that or listen to that. Oh my gosh, that's intense.
And this happens all the time, and this is such a fascinating thing that it sort of happens under the surface of that repressive rule. Under it, a lot of things are happening, and we need something like that. I don't know how one can generate that kind of space here, but what is lacking here is, even in public discourses here in politics, when people say, "Oh, that's an academic issue," it means that it's irrelevant, right?
Yeah.
But
to add to that, Dr. Ghamari-Tabrizi, many times when you talk about history, or I talk. People mention that I have a history program, both History Behind News and now Unraveling the Middle East. People say things about history that are not really what I do or what many people that I engage with do. I think to many Western Europeans and most certainly Americans, history is kind of like History Channel. What kind of muskets were used in the Revolutionary War?
That's right.
Who were the generals? These are like fun facts. They're not analysis of like, was America's revolution supported by everyone? These are more profound than I don't think there's patience or perhaps interest.
Yeah, there are chronicles. There are chronicles. Like General X was, leading this counter-offensive in that front.
Exactly. I want to close our conversation with this question. Yesterday we talked about Dr. Shariati. And even before we got to him, you made this statement, and I think this is almost a quote from what you said. You said, Western democracies have either failed or will fail. So the point that I want to mention about him here is that he believed that major Western democracy is essentially demagogy. With Mr. Trump's brand of populism that is so rampant in our politics, and you also see it in Brazil, in Hungary, other places. Do you think Dr. Shariati's view about Western democracy was correct?
No, I don't think his view was correct, because I don't think that his main concern was to think about democracy as a principle of political authority. That was not his preoccupation. His preoccupation was liberation from colonial yoke, and
I see.
And so he really didn't spend much time to think about these issues. He was critical. For him and many others, you could not and should not separate Western democracies from their colonial impulse. Colonial impulse is a part and parcel of Western democracies. And without colonialism, they could not sustain their democratic systems inside their own countries. And so this is like, we have this conversation today about the Middle East and Palestine and Israel, for example, and people say that Israel is the only democratic country in the region, and a lot of people on the Palestinian side will say that you can't understand Israel as a democracy with the way they treat Palestinians. They're part of the same system. They're not separate. So, like American organized coup in Iran in 1953, American organized coup in Chile, in Guatemala, in Indonesia, in war in Vietnam, they're not a separate part from American democracy. They are part of the same system. one allows the other to operate.
Indirectly, perhaps.
Indirectly, and
Yeah.
sometimes directly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the direct part is, the economic benefit that they rip from colonial expansion, right?
Yeah.
And of course, if the U.S., and this is what we are going through right now, because whenever there are economic crises, democracies are challenged, right? Because
Yeah.
you can have this populist demagogue, and it happens in Argentina, in Brazil, in the U.S.
Yeah. Yeah.
So democracies need economic stability. Without economic stability, democracies become dysfunctional. And that economic stability has a lot to do with the role in the world, that colonial expansion, imperialism. Of course, these days, you say imperialism, people close their ears. They say, oh, don't say these are old concepts. But I don't think these are old concepts.
Yeah.
They're very, very relevant because they contribute to economic stability that is so foundational in maintaining a democratic system. And why fascism emerged, in Germany.
It was an economic disaster was happening in Germany.
Disaster, right?
Yeah.
So when people like Shariati and others argue that you cannot separate colonial intentions from democratic systems in the motherlands, I think there is an important point there, and we've seen it, and we will see it in the future. And a part of this conversation, you need to obviously talk to someone who knows American society much better than I do. But this is partly the reason that the American democratic system is so shaky now. That
Yeah.
there's a different kind of world order is emerging, and that world order has a lot to do with the survival of American democracy.
Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. Dr. Ghamari-Tabrizi, thank you for educating me and our listeners. And to our listeners,
Thank you so much.
If you know of any history that could unravel the Middle East, please share it with us. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.